I'm Malcolm Warner, the museum's executive director. How pleased the early artists of Laguna Beach would be to see you all here gathered to hear someone talking about them. Because they built this room. This grand gallery was custom built for showing and selling the work of the Laguna Beach Art Association. And it opened in 1929. It was their pride and joy. And we're celebrating the Laguna Beach Art Association because the organization itself was founded in 1918, so it's the Centennial year this year, 2018, of that early. And part of the celebration was to restore this room to the way it looked when it opened in 1929. So all this paneling here, we put it in especially for our current exhibition, which is a show of the work of the early Laguna Beach painters who formed that association. It's my great pleasure this evening to introduce our speaker, Eric Jessen. Eric's from an old Orange County family. Until his retirement in 2005, he worked for the county's Harbors, Beaches and Parks Department as Chief of Acquisition Planning and Development, and he was with that department for 31 years, playing a vital role in establishing 20 of Orange County's regional parks, along with historic sites including the Majesty House and the Irvine Ranch Historic Park. Eric's last large construction projects included the reconstruction of the Irvine Mansion as the Katie Wheeler Library in Irvine. Eric is a born historian, I would say, and one of his favorite pursuits in his retirement has been sleuthing in the field of historic art. And he's the expert at identifying the exact locations of views painted by those early Laguna Beach painters. So anyway, here to talk about those early Laguna Beach artists, please join me in welcoming Eric Jessen.
Thank you all for helping us celebrate the Laguna Art Museum Centennial. I'd like to dedicate this program this evening to Richard and Beverly Jarris and the memory of Bill and Donna Thomas. What I thought we'd do this evening is sleuth out a few spots where some of our founding artists plopped down their easels along the old coast road in Laguna and started painting away. I'm sure many of them had no idea that in some cases, 100 years later, we'd be admiring their work right here in the very same gallery they toiled to build. Let's start out going down through Laguna from north to south. Eternal Surge by Edgar Pyne. A couple of these you've seen before and I've talked about before. This iconic masterpiece, painted in 1921, about 2 blocks oceanward of the Old Coast Road, is part of Laguna Art Museum's permanent collection. Some of you might recall that in my Edgar Pyne The Scenic Journey program here a few years ago, it took me almost 4 years to find exactly where these rocks awash in the swelling surf were located. I had to traverse the entire Laguna coastline on foot from Abalone Point to Three Arch Bay under low and medium and high tide conditions, and even during storms, because of the nature of the way that Pyne showed the water swelling over the rocks. It turns out that Payne's easel was situated in Coward's Cove, below the Twin Points Estate on Marine Drive, just north of Shaw's Cove. And here are the rocks awash. Laguna Coastline by Joseph Kleitsch was painted from the approximate vantage point of Pyne Castle on High Drive, well above the Old Coast Road. There's no date on it, but judging from the lack of development depicted, we think it was around 1923. In the foreground, we see Boat Canyon Arroyo, where Riddle Field and the Pavilion Shopping Center are now located. Here's the home of early plein air artist Anne Robinson, who studied, by the way, under Anna Hills, and it is situated at the corner of Monterey Drive and Hawthorne Street. The house is still standing, lovingly owned and maintained by Scot and Julie Thomas, who are in this room tonight. Scot is my former colleague at OC Parks, where he's the manager of planning and design. So here is Monterey Street in North Laguna, and these two houses front on Hawthorne. Here is Myrtle, these little houses right here, and the museum where it's located today is right in where this grove of eucalyptus trees was situated. I cut my teeth in art sleuthing with this canvas. It was kind of a real neat one because, you know, once you figured out what that creek was and could just kind of decipher the depressions in the canvas for the streets and the way the buildings were aligned, it began to unfold, and then more obvious aspects like Gough Island being visible right here and so forth. It was kind of my introduction to art sleuthing, which at the time this painting was owned by Mike Feddersen and Joe Ambrose, who were major Kleitsch collectors. The current owner was gracious enough to allow this painting to be used on the cover of the new book titled Laguna Beach, Celebrating a Treasured Historic American Landscape, which documents the 2017 National Park Service's designation of the entire city of Laguna Beach and its 22,000-acre greenbelt as a National Historic Landscape, the records of which are permanently lodged in the Library of Congress. I had the honor of serving on the committee that spearheaded this project, along with Tom Lamb and Mark Chamberlain and Ron Chilcote and Harry Huggins and Bob Borthwick and Barbara Metzger, Verna Rollinger and Ann Kristoff. Laguna is the very first entire city in the United States to receive this honor. An interesting historic fact regarding Pyne Castle. J. Walter Pyne owned a successful music store in Orange County. He invested wisely in real estate in the Yorba Linda area, where, guess what? Oil was discovered, okay? Pyne recognized the future importance of various crumbling adobe structures that were situated on the Spanish and Mexican ranchos across the Southland. He did something very unique. He bought many of them. He covered them with roofs, and he clad them with wooden clapboard siding, ultimately saving them from further weather deterioration. Today, the public can enjoy many of these magnificent and in some cases modest restored adobe structures that are commonly situated within historic parks throughout the Southland. It seems like El Paseo, just off the Old Coast Road on Main Beach, was kind of an artist's hotspot. Let's look at two paintings done there and then another offering a different perspective. Las Ondas Gate, painted by Anna Hills, I think around 1918. I love this intimate, unassuming canvas that depicts the blue gate into one of the courtyards of the old Las Ondas Cafe, later known as the Breakers, which is the English translation of Ondas, and after that called Dante's. The huge Lagunaria pattersoni, or primrose tree that is still growing in the lawn at the very south end of Main Beach Park near the Hotel Laguna was planted within the courtyard. It still stands as a sentinel of times past, one of the most historic specimen trees in the city. Here is Kleitsch's El Paseo, and what we're doing is we're looking down El Paseo from straight towards what is the freshly graded pad for the new Hotel Laguna that was constructed in 1930. And one of my more recent discoveries is in Hinkle's Laguna Beach, painted a short block oceanward of Old Coast Road from the vantage point of the Victor Hugo / Las Brisas restaurant. Here is his depiction of that newly graded pad. You see, there is no hotel standing here. There's the Los Andes Cafe, and right next to it is the pad, the same pad that you see in the Kleitsch painting. The old Hotel Laguna is gone, and the new Hotel Laguna is coming soon. And to think that both this hotel and the Del Camino, the gallery that you're sitting in tonight, the Artists Theater, and the Laguna Presbyterian Church were all built at roughly the same time. Just think of it. The largest structures in this city were all almost simultaneously under construction. The latter three are symbols of this town's powerful philanthropy and generosity, no matter how small the population was. Scintillating, painted by Joseph Kleitsch in 1930. Many years ago, I was taking Joe Ambrose and Mike Feddersen up to my place at Mount Whitney Portal. And for almost the whole drive up and well into the next day, they were embroiled in a telephone bidding war with another party for Kleitsch's Scintillating. The other party won out and got the painting. I got home a couple of weeks later, and they called me over to their house, and there it was, hanging above their fireplace. I can't tell you what transpired to reverse the situation in their favor. But as research got underway for the Irvine Museum's Joseph Kleitsch, A Kaleidoscope of Color book, Dr. Patricia Trenton called upon me to find the locations for Kleitsch's Laguna canvases. Well, this one took more than a couple of years to solve. You can see there's a large building at Canvas right. So I thought, this is a no-brainer. Just account for the few large buildings in Laguna at the time. There was the Ye Arch Beach Tavern at the end of Catalina in Upper Woods Cove, the Hotel Del Camino, the Hotel Laguna, the Laguna Presbyterian Church, the Laguna Elementary School Artists Auditorium, which is now the high school, etc. The problem was that none of the physical settings and views surrounding any of those iconic structures fit the painting. And we know for certain that Kleitsch pretty much always painted exactly what he saw. He didn't move stuff around like Edgar Payne did in the Sierra Nevada. And yet, all the while, many times I'd been to my friend Bill Atkins' second-story apartment on Bent Street. It was easy to see Kleitsch's symbolic brushstroke for Bird Rock, which is right here. He just touched it with his brush. Looking down Park Avenue, this is Park Avenue, out into the water. But then I detected a perfect match for the roof line and the eaves on the back of the Cove house, which is one of the oldest houses in Laguna, which is right at Park Avenue in Glenire, the red two-story house. Here, and that cinched it. So Kleitsch's easel was but a block from his and Edna's home studio, perched on a bluff about 4 blocks inland from the New Coast Road, just above Bent Street, with Bill Atkins' 4-unit apartment building in it. Today, the building is still roughly the same color as it is depicted in the canvas. All of Kleitsch's works are important, but Scintillating has the distinction of being his final work before his untimely death. He and his wife Edna drove into Santa Ana. She went into the now old Orange County Courthouse to pay their property tax bill. When she returned to the car, he was dead behind the steering wheel at the age of 49. Recall how vividly colorful all of Kleitsch's canvases are. Yet look at this one, white and silver, almost an eerie glare coming off the sea, like Kleitsch knew something was going to happen to him. My Studio, painted by William Swift Daniel in 1920. I love this one because it's so easy. Barbara and John Bing were big-time museum supporters for years. I'd been to their home many times. Barbara was William Swift Daniel's granddaughter. She lived in his house. I knew where it was, so it was easy to find. It still stands today right at the foot of Thalia Street. And when you look, along the development texture of the shoreline, you see this one area that's still got an intact bluff with a lot of vegetation, and right there is William Swift Daniels' studio, a half a block oceanward of the Old Coast Road. The Old Coast Road, painted by William Went in 1916. I've got a special treat for you about this at the end of the program, so we'll just kind of touch here and there about the Old Coast Road, some details right now. In 1916, when the paint wasn't even dry on this canvas, William Went traded this painting with Richard Jarvis, Sr. of the Laguna Beach Lumber Company in return for materials to help build his home studio at the foot of Arch Street, overlooking the Old Coast Road and Rockledge shoreline. Here we see the Ibbetson House, probably the most fantastic Hawaiian colonial style structure that ever existed in Orange County. We don't really know what materials Went got for the painting. Certainly lumber. Maybe a toilet? No, I suspect that the Wents had an outhouse to start with. Maybe a sink, linoleum, hardware, cement, whatever. But keep in mind that there weren't any art supply shops in town. The artists got their supplies from Jarvis's hardware store on the Lumberyard premises, the exact building that today houses the Lumberyard restaurant, a Normandy-style building designed by Jean Egas. They had canvases, easels, palettes, brushes, oil and watercolor paints, and even custom frames made to order on the premises. So, like all the other artists in town, Went surely got his painting supplies there. As important as this painting is, it's very easy to solve the location of Went's easel. He simply plopped it down on the inland side of the Old Coast Road, about where Victoria Drive or Rockledge Road intersect with it. The Villa Rockledge was constructed right here. Moss Point has no building standing on it. There's a hint of a building up in this area in the direction of where Went and his wife built their home and studio, but it's too far up. In the distance, we have Abalone Knoll, which leads to the potential conclusion that Went hadn't started construction by the time he painted the canvas. So who knows, maybe he traded the canvas for the first lumber or cement. I've had the pleasure of being at the Went property many times over the years, mostly just to hope and pray that the house didn't get torn down and replaced with another, to be polite, less interesting structure. I wish I didn't have to be in the picture, but it's the only one I've got, taken by Steve Judson, who's with McGillivray Freeman Films, and he's in this room tonight as well. This historic photograph is almost a splitting image of the canvas, except that you can see that the Ibbotsons, who were wealthy Corona citrus ranchers, were entertaining an overflowing crowd. Theirs was a big house that slept a lot of people. I know, I lived at the Villa Rockledge right next door and was close friends with one of the grandsons. I was in and out of that house many times before it was torn down to be replaced with a building of considerably lesser interest. But I love the photo because it shows tents and more than one car that we see in the canvas. And guess what? I'm pretty sure that this is Went's house, because that's exactly where it was located, just a couple of doors to the west and across the street, which means that the painting predates the photo. I actually took Ektachrome slides of the Ibbetson House over the years that I lived in the Rockledge. But the best one that I got from the same vantage point that you would see in the painting wasn't returned when I loaned it out in the 1980s. And so this image is all I have left, and I had to lift it from a development history of Southern California program that I gave when I was guest lecturing at UCI. So that's why it's not very high resolution. So before we say goodbye to this most famous of all of the plein air canvases that looks up the Old Coast Road, here's a look down the Old Coast Road in South Laguna, now Monterey Street, or in Costa Real. Notice the absence of cars on the beach, not a single car. We'll get back to that 2 paintings from now. Laguna Cottages by William Wendt. This painting was done off the end of Upper Arch Street. The house in the foreground was built by my longtime neighbor, Basil Ingalls, beginning around 1913. I remember stories about how he and his friend that was helping him build it hauled sand to make cement up off the beach, which is why the rock work kept falling apart on the house, because you can't use sand off the beach. They used water out of the ocean to make the cement. That even makes it worse, but the house is still standing. He started this house 3 years before his nearest neighbor, who was none other than William Wendt, who built his house at the foot of Arch Street overlooking the Rockledge shoreline. At the time, Basil was 21 and Wendt was 49. Basil was an interesting guy. When he was 1.5 years old, his parents moved from Brooklyn, New York to Pasadena due to his dad's poor respiratory health. Unfortunately, his dad died soon thereafter. But Mrs. Ingalls went on to be a very successful Pasadena photo studio entrepreneur. So when Basil was 5, she brought him down to Laguna and they stayed at the old Laguna Beach Hotel. That was 1897. A realtor, imagine there were realtors in town in those days. Actually, cigar maker Elmer Jarvis, I think, was a realtor. Took them in a buckboard from the hotel out Glen Eyre to about what is now Diamond or Moss Street, from where a single-track horse trail continued into the brush. They saddled up and rode the rest of the way as far as what is now Upland Road. There, Mrs. Ingalls bought 14 lots. They returned to their home in Pasadena, which coincidentally happened to be next door to the Barkers of the Barker Brothers Furniture Company in Los Angeles. And while growing up and going to school with the Barker kids, at a young age, Basil got a job working in the stockroom. Through his career, he worked his way up to Chief of Interior Design. Basil's house, as I mentioned, is still standing, but I suspect not for long. Before I bought my home, for 12 years, I lived in a penthouse apartment that was located right where this structure is. This is the notorious dog leg on the end of Glen Eyre between Upland and going up to Alta Vista. And this is Queta Way, coming back from Alta Vista, coming north and dead-ending into Rockledge Creek, which flows down just on the other side of Basil's house. By the way, if you look in the city's 1982 Historical Resources Inventory, you'll learn that in many cases, well-known people built homes on many streets in town. It just so happens that located on Queta Way is the home of the family that founded the Honeywell Corporation. Here is Basil Ingalls in 1987 at age 94, cleaning out his chimney. I had to lecture him at the time, was long overdue to stay off of ladders. Being of one of Wendt's closest neighbors in that isolated setting for so long, of course he owned 3 Wendt canvases, which he donated in his will to Laguna Presbyterian Church. But something strange happened because I've talked to people at the church who have no recollection of receiving the paintings. This happens once in a while. Since Basil was reared in Pasadena, he was buried at Mountain View Cemetery in Altadena beside his parents. I think he lived to about 103. William Lees Judson, a co-founder of the plein air movement and founding dean of the School of Fine Arts and Architecture at USC, is also buried nearby. It was an honor to be a close friend with Basil, who was really a great guy and a good friend and neighbor of William Wendt's for 30 years. Aliso Overpass, also painted by Joseph Kleitsch, sometime around 1926-27. Gosh, folks, the location of this one isn't difficult either for obvious reasons. It's the Aliso Circle pedestrian overpass just north of Aliso Creek. But what I love about it is how Kleitsch depicted the new South Coast Boulevard, first constructed as 2 lanes wide in 1926, along with this new overpass. Notice the curvature in the painting right here. Let's compare that bend in the boulevard with this historic photo, and you'll see it's almost exactly the same. What's the difference in the canvas? There are cars mixed with the tents on the beach, and that's because of the new highway. Now we're going to push the envelope just a little bit and step outside of town, further down the old coast road into what is today Monarch Beach. Untitled painting, Salt Creek Canyon, painted by William Griffith. It's undated, but appears to be sometime in the very early 1920s. Ambrose Feddersen and I found this when we went to visit Griffith's grandson, Nelson Hawley, in Fallbrook years ago. Although a seemingly obscure scene, I spotted it right away. If you lived here in the 1960s, you might remember the two big white barns that sat just below the new Crown Valley Parkway, only a few blocks inland from the Coast Highway. Well, folks, those are the barns. The Moulton Ranch barns, perched above Salt Creek, threading its way down this way, and with Old Saddleback in the background. It's a very, very small painting, but it's priceless in terms of sentimentality. And speaking of sentimentality, this photo is priceless as well. William Griffith's home studio, located right across the street from Las Brisas / Victor Hugo Inn and the art gallery. The palm trees are still standing in the front of the condo building that is still there. We have the gazebo in place and the old pathway that led down to the pier that was at the foot of the cliff. And we may as well peek around the corner and look down North Coast Boulevard toward downtown in 1960. Does it look any different, folks? Only the cars, right? Bumper to bumper traffic, free parking, lunch and dinners, lots of signs. Now we have a sign ordinance. These are just a smattering of the works painted in Laguna. But in the vein of Edgar Pyne, so to speak, let's take a quick trip into the Eastern Sierra to pinpoint the location of just one painting featured in the current exhibition, Sierra Majesty by Paul Lauritz, painted circa 1920. At first, this appears to be one of the many creeks, although albeit a large creek, flowing out of the Eastern Sierra that dumps water into the Owens Valley Aqueduct to quench Los Angeles' thirst. But notice something strange. There aren't any ripples in what should be a cascading creek. So it's not a creek, it's Long Lake, up the South Fork of Bishop Creek, upstream of South Lake. It's long and narrow, and in Lauritz's painting, it kind of looks like a creek, but without ripples. The absence of which is just one of several clues a painting detective might notice. It's kind of a fun spot. The lake is framed to the left outside the canvas by a mountain range called the Inconsolable Range. Sounds inviting, doesn't it? But then nearby mountains have whimsical names, including Chocolate Peak and Picture Puzzle and Cloud Ripper. I love that last name, Cloud Ripper. I've seen a few clouds ripped up by Mount Whitney before over the years. My mountaineer assistant that has helped on the Edgar Pyne project, and I solved the location for those 14 canvases in the Eastern Sierra Nevada a number of years ago that were presented in an earlier program here. But when Janet Blake sent this canvas to me, I called Horvath back into action all the way from Boulder, Colorado. Right away, he was pretty sure it's Long Lake, but we don't take these assignments lightly. He's been there, and we worked on it while we were at my cabin just over a month ago. And here is the physical relationship between Long Lake, there's South Lake, and this is the west end edge of the town of Bishop. And as for the peaks in the painting, our assessment is that this is 13,092-foot Mount Good, spelled with an E, in the center, and 12,219-foot Herd Peak to the right. But like in some of Pyne's canvases, there appears to be significant artistic license taken here. Lauritz depicts a dramatized portion of the ridge that extends off the summit of Mount Good. As for the little Matterhorn-esque peak in the distance at the left, It's a perfect match between what you see in the painting and what you see standing on the ground at Long Lake. And by the way, I think that Mount Good is named for the famous cartographer and geographer associated with Good's World Atlas, authored and edited by Edward Espin Shade Jr. Since the 1920s, it has been the world's premier educational atlas in use almost 100 years at colleges and universities around the globe. Coincidentally, Horvath just solved another painting in this general area for Bonhams yesterday. And now, folks, with the most generous permission of the Jarvis family, you get to see what I like to call the saga of the Old Coast Road. I'm going to skip the first 99 years because I told you some of that stuff already. But that's how long the painting hung in the Jarvis home, 99 years, before the family decided it was time for a new owner. And I was kind of thunderstruck when they asked me to help in this endeavor because I didn't know anything about sales. I'm a detective. But I had some good guidance on how to not botch this situation. So the first thing we did was to contact various museums to see if they were interested, but they had all expended their annual acquisition budgets. It was towards the end of the year. Eventually, I was directed to Scot Levitt, who was the vice president at Bonhams in Los Angeles. I'm not going to go too deeply into the strategy, but safe to say that a couple of paintings in the Jarvis collection went up for auction there earlier, which piqued collectors' interest that something else might be forthcoming. It turns out they were laying in wait for something big. And so it was that in December of 2014, Scot Levitt came to the Jarvis home to check things out. He's a nice, low-key, honest kind of guy, just like the Jarvis family members are. There wasn't any high-pressure sales job, just a factual sequence of events that I'm going to share with you here. I'll call it The Old Coast Road Leaves Laguna. Here is Scot visiting the painting with Joe and Jeff Jarvis. And here, he's waving his magic wand over it just to see if there might be a Mona Lisa painted behind it, or evidence of damage or repair or restoration. He also waved his wand over this magnificent Wendt masterpiece, Misty Morning in Santa Ana Canyon, same size as the Old Coast Road. And by the way, that location of that is about where the 241 toll road comes down onto the 91 freeway. The mountains in the right-hand side of the canvas were all graded down for sand and gravel to build the 91 freeway, the toll road, and the whole area was slated for development as Mountain Park Specific Plan by the Irvine Company before Donald Bren so generously removed all of his development proposals from this area and from around Irvine Lake and dedicated the land into the Orange County Park System. But the difference between those two paintings is that Misty Morning in Santa Ana Canyon was not on the dust jacket of Ruth Westfall's 2-volume encyclopedia. She's the one who in 1982 almost single-handedly revived public interest in the entire plein air arts movement. In the very first week the 2-volume books came out, I got my copies at the Gamble House in Pasadena. I just happened to see them there. I didn't even know about them. So we go to lunch at where else? The Lumberyard restaurant. I mean, folks, isn't that where all the big decisions are made in town? It's right across the street from City Hall. Then we come back to the house and Scot Levitt discusses an auction scenario. And then we go back to the painting and discuss cleaning and framing for auction. And I suggested that Levitt handle that stuff. So the painting comes off the wall, perhaps never to return to Laguna. But guess what, folks? It did return by the kind generosity of the new owners who have lent it for the current exhibition. Kudos to you, whomever you are, and thank you.
A lot of this business in general is in large part gut just through experience and psychological, because estimates need to be enticing. That's first and foremost. I still think 400 to 600 is the best number for that painting. And I think as far as reserve, like starting bid, I think we need to be even a little bit lower just to get the bidding started, something like 350. And then I think it could potentially do, you know, that or considerably higher. I mean, we had one that's the closest comparison I can give you. Granted, it was in a stronger market, but in 2008 we sold a painting that's very similar to one that's on the cover of the Northland book, and it's by E. Charlton Fortune. And that particular piece is in a museum, so can't sell that one. But we had one, but she's very rare for that subject matter. So we finally had a subject matter, Monterey Wharf, come up. Hadn't had one, and we had it in for $300,000 to $500,000 and brought 1.8 million. So yeah, so I'm not saying that we're necessarily going to make lightning strike twice, but you know, using that as the closest thing I have as a comparison, that's not just a coincidence that that happened. You know, I mean, there are similarities, and with collectors, they want to buy the best of the best of the best always. Those are the
Jars residence in
the
Laguna
ones that
Beach.
where people can go, you know, if I
December
wait a sale,
9th,
I'm find a similar one on the
2014.
next sale. Those aren't as easy to sell. And frankly, as nice as this painting is, and it's a beautiful painting, people
Eric
know
Jessen
that we're going to have
narrated.
wins all the time.
Right.
We're not going to have the cover of the
With
plein air book ever again.
Right.
Jeff Jars
That makes
on
a
the
big
left and
difference.
Joe
Right.
Jars on
No,
the
no,
right.
that's okay. So we have 4 wins. That one, that one. You just talking. We just.
Okay, so now that's video number 1, where he discusses the auction price range with Jeff and Joe. Now, I want you to pay extra close attention to this. The painting leaves Laguna.
Part of this, if you remember one.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm just gonna wrap this in a blanket and then put it in the car, and then we'll go come grab the other one, unless you want to bring it out.
It's leaving the house. Scott's got the painting. Trips and falls.
Eric's falling into the painting.
Oh, good. That's on the video. Scott said I was falling into the
Eric
painting.
is falling through the painting.
There we go. Then it goes into the van.
Oops. Yeah, will you hold that up?
It's little episodes like that that make this a real fun business to be in. Now we're going to fast forward to April 28th, 2015, a preview of the Bonhams Gallery before the auction starts. And on April 28th, 2015, Eric Jessen in another back gallery of Bonhams. Here's the 2 paintings, lesser paintings from the Jars collection up for auction tonight, along with the Old Coast Road. Beautiful antiques and setting. Pretty good stuff. Nice setting for the exhibit of the paintings for auction tonight. Beautiful glass work. Beautiful. Check out these 2 chairs in this buffet. Guess I better get back in the auction room. Our Old Coast Road will be coming up pretty soon. Eric Jessen signing out. So now we go to the auction. The auction begins.
The way it went, Old Coast Road, which I am very honored to be selling this evening. After going through 31 years of auctioning, it's, I think, the nicest painting certainly I've ever had the distinction of auctioning. So thank you all for attending, and good luck to everyone. So we're starting, there is some interest in this. Big surprise. So we'll start the bidding on this one already now at $300,000. Starting at $300 for Old Coast Road, $300,000. $300,000 is the bid now at $300,000. $320,000 already now at $320,000. $350,000. $350,000 is the bid now at $350,000. 3,000 is the bid now, 350. 380, thank you. 380 is the bid, 400 now. 400 bid, 400. 400 bid, 420. Thank you. 420,000 I have now here in the room in Los Angeles at 420,000. 450. 450 is bid there. A little healthy competition. 450 bid now at 450. 480 will be next. 480. 500 is the next bid now at 500 I have. 500 is bid, go 50. 500 is the bid now at 500,000 now here at 500. 500 is the bid, go 550. 550 I have with Mark's phone, 550. 600. 600 bid now at 600,000. 650. 650,000 on the phone at 650. 700,000. 700,000 bid here now at 750. 750,000 here on the telephone at 750. 750 is the bid now at 750,000. 800 will be next.
800.
Thank you. 800 new bidder. 800 now with Aaron at 800. 800 go 850. 800 is the bid now at 800,000. 850 on the telephone with Angela first at 850 now. New bidder at 850. 850,000 now. 900 will be next. 850 is the bid now. 900. Thank you. 900 on the other phone. Thank you. 900 bid now. Go 50. 900 bid with Mark's phone now at 900,000. 900,000. 950. Angela now. 950 all on the telephone now. 950. 950,000 is the bid now at 950. Go an even million. 950 is the bid now at 950.
1 million.
Thank you, Aaron. 1 million is the bid now at $1 million. $1 million, I'll take 50. So it'd be 1,050,000 if they want to bid. I have 150. 1,050,000. 1.1 will be next. The air conditioner.
Dead silence.
1,050,000. 1,050,000 is the bid now at 1,050,000. 1.1 will be next. And 1,050,000, are we all through? All done? Aaron, you out? 1.1 I have, thank you. 1.1 is the bid now. 1.1. 1.150 will be next. 1.1 I have now at 1,000,001. 1,000,001 is
1,150.
1,150. 1.2 will be next. 1,150 we have in San Francisco. 1.2 I have on the telephone now. 1.2 with Angela now. 1.2 million is the bid now. 1.2 million. 1.2 million 50 will be next. At 1.2 on the telephone here in Los Angeles. 1.2 is the bid now. 1.2.
We're out.
Any further bidding? At $1.2 million on the telephone. 1.25. Thank you, sir. Is the bid now at 1.250? 1.3 will be next, Angela. 1.3 on the telephone at 1,000,003. 1,000,003 is the bid now at 1,000,003. 1,350,000 will be next. At 1,000,003 on the phone here in Los Angeles at 1,000,003. Any further bidding? $1.3 million on the telephone at 1.3. Are we all through? All done at 1,300,000 on the telephone. If no more selling, then at 1.3. And drop it. All through, all done at 1,300,000. 213 out. 1.3. Thanks, Angela. Thank you all. That was very exciting. Well, 35. So we have plenty more to sell.
$1,300,000.
The low asking was 4 to 6, 400,000 to 60. Eric Jessen signing out. Having been a pleasure working for the Jarvis family, Laguna Beach, April 28, 2015, on Sunset Boulevard, Providence.
I'd want to sincerely thank the individuals listed here in the credits. Special helpers Gregory Horvath, Mountaineer, Tom Lamb for special effects, and Greg O'Loughlin for both the aerial photography and the special effects. And the other critically important people, Janet Blake and the entire staff here at the museum, Michael Feddersen, the Friends of Harbors, Beaches and Parks, the Jarvis family, Jane Jans, Rick Lang, Fine Arts, Scott Levitt, Joe Sinicore, engineer, Dr. Patricia Trenton, and the painting owners. I wouldn't be here tonight if it wasn't for the help from all of them. So let's give a big round of applause in appreciation to the Jarvis family for having carefully treasured and safeguarded the painting for 99 years. And to the new owners for being so generous to lend it for the current exhibition.